Hello, this is Manny Ramos, your host of Rise Up, Real Issues and Stories of Every One of Us podcast. First, let me talk about who we are. I'm Manny Ramos, a board member of PNAA, a past president of the Philippine Nurses Association of Central Florida. I'm a professor of nursing at Valencia College in Orlando and an adjunct faculty at William Patterson University. With me today is my co-host, Mindy Ofiana. Mindy?
Thank you, Manny. I'm Mindy Ofiana, Legislative Committee Chair for PNAA and Corresponding Secretary for the PNAA Foundation, past President for PNA Southern California, and currently an adjunct professor at Charles R. Drew University, Department of Medicine and Sciences. Manny?
Thank you, Mindy. Today, our guest is Ellen Arigorat, a program director in a New York hospital. Ellen is a board member of the Philippine Nurses Association of New York and the chair of the PNAA Nursing Informatics Significant Interest Group. Ellen also serves as a board member of the Kalusugan Coalition, whose mission is to create a unified voice to improve the health of the Filipino American community. Ellen is here to talk with us about her involvement with these organizations and the All of Us program, a historic effort to collect and study data from over 1 million people living in the United States with the goal of a better health for all of us. Good afternoon, Ellen. Welcome to Rise Up.
Thank you, Manny, and thank you, Mindy, for having me today.
Good to have you at Rise Up, Ellen. Could How are you? To start with.
I'm trying. I'm trying to stay warm. It's kind of cold in the east here. It's like
Oh my God, and it's
54, like
boiling hot
50.
here
I
in
have
California.
I actually have a sweater on. I've been
Oh,
wearing a fleece
Oh,
jacket most of
oh
the
God.
day. Oh, so
So anyway,
waiting for summer.
yeah.
could you share your roots with our viewers and listeners? Where did you grow up, and how did that upbringing influence you?
Sure. So I was born in the Philippines in uh I don't know if I want to say tiny town. And it's not a town, it's a city. It's called Bacolod City, or
Oh,
well known as the City of Smiles in the island of Negros Occidental, which is part of the Visayan region.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have two brothers. We were all born there, and when I was 7, I came to America, immigrated,
Mhm.
and has been a resident in New Jersey and New York area. So my upbringing was very short-lived in the Philippines, but as we all know, in the Philippines, there's such a thing of a family house where you live with
Mhm.
multiple um, family members. And so you lived with cousins and had never a dull moment growing up there. And
Uh-huh.
then when you came to America, where it changes your whole perspective and different types of rules, um, you become acculturated. So the
Mhm.
first thing I kind of learned was I had to learn English, even though despite the fact that I started speaking in English, I was like, oh, okay, there's an actual class for ES, uh, English is second language.
Right.
So what was great about it was my mom and her friends were recruited at the same time, so they came from the same island, but came into the same hospital.
Uh-huh.
So the kids around my age became childhood friends, and we
Mm,
became close in that sense because went to the same school. We knew the experiences, and you created a close knit family in
Uh-huh.
away from home. So
mm,
to this day, we're still friends. We all became at least one family member is a nurse per se in the household that we grew up in with our friends, and so I lived in New Jersey, central New
Uh-huh.
Jersey, which is predominantly the town that I grew up in was Hispanics,
Mhm.
Dominicans and Puerto Ricans. So
Yeah.
when you hear Spanish and then you're like, oh, I have to learn English, and then oh no, you have to also learn Spanish. I'm like, oh, I'm very confused now. But you go with the flow. I think that
Uh-huh.
is one of the biggest things that I learned growing up is learning to adapt to your environment,
Mm.
whether you're changing schools, locations. Because when I was in fifth grade, we moved to the now where we live in Saraville, so that was predominantly Polish neighborhoods
Mhm.
and such. So it's like you had to ride a school bus. I'm like, oh wait, what do you mean? What's the school bus? So that's a whole different perspective, and that's really kind of the upbringing. My two brothers, and it's really like really when growing up, my parents said, "You're all we're the five of us is who we have," because
Mm.
there's really no one else that has our
Mhm.
last name. Growing
Mhm.
up, if you Google search my last name, it's very far and few in between, especially in America. So
Uh-huh.
if something happens, your immediate family is who
Mhm.
you have um,
Uh,
uh, left. So really, that kind of was instilled that like your family is what you got until
Mhm.
um, you figure out what you want to do in life.
uh-huh.
So childhood was that. High school was pretty much a little bit of a hard time because when I was 16, my dad was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Oh.
Lymphoma.
We didn't know about it until he came. My mom, worked nights 3 to 11,
Uh,
so, he was there with us during the day and the nights, and my mom would work. So
yeah.
one time, like, my mom's like, "Why do you like having night sweats?" And he's like, "Oh, I've been having it." And he's
Uh,
had weight loss, but the reason why he had weight we attributed the weight loss to because he had high cholesterol and high blood pressure. So he went into this like strict diet
Diet.
and
Uh-huh.
lost
mhm.
several pounds until the whole night sweats and fevers came about. And my mom goes, "There's something
Mhm.
else wrong."
Yeah.
So they did all the testing that they did and didn't couldn't find anything until the day before he was to be discharged. As you know,
Oh.
Filipinos are really strong in faith, and my mom kind of like did a little prayer that like said like, "Hey,
Mhm.
help us kind of figure out what's going on with my husband."
Yeah.
And so luckily I don't know if it's luckily, but a lymph node popped up, and so
Oh.
they're like, "Oh, there it is." So he had a biopsy that day. The doctor came out of surgery and said it's suspected lymphoma, but we just need to confirm it, and it was confirmed
Mhm.
um, later on. So 16 years old. Dad went through chemo, radiation. So for the next year and a half, that was our lives, making sure my dad
Mhm.
was on healthy precautions because when you have
Right.
cancer, you're on low blood white counts, so he was very
Mhm.
prone to sickness. Really didn't know anything about medical things, but I know like my mom's a nurse and
Mhm.
that's that type of living. And then he was in remission for a good year and a half, and then when I turned 18, he was diagnosed with what we call CML, which is chronic myelogenous
Mhm.
leukemia,
Leukemia.
secondary
Mhm.
from
Hodgkin's.
the Luke Hodgkin's.
Yeah.
Right.
The reason why is because his blood cells. The doctor just said, "Oh, your blood cells are not the right way." So
Mhm.
that was 18, and you were like, when we didn't have Google back then in a sense,
Right.
so you figure out like who do you talk to. So you look at really kind of like just very quickly do the internet searches,
Mhm.
and during that time, um, the mortality rate was high, but luckily they had this wonder drug that we call it the wonder drug is Gleevec,
Uh,
and so he was started on that trial. The
uh-huh.
doctor put him on it, and he responded very well. But you see how healthcare, um, despite the fact that you have healthcare workers working in healthcare, the
Mhm.
healthcare itself was hard in a sense that medication is not fully covered. You had to still pay out of pocket $3,000
Oh, wow.
um, like a drug to keep someone alive, and
Right.
to navigate the healthcare system and insurances was something to watch my mother go through.
So, Ellen, how was your dad after the CML diagnosis?
So he was fine. the only thing that, he had to keep a certain regimen where he had to get bone marrow biopsies every 3 months to 6 months, and then continue making sure that he was not act like reversing with the
Uh-huh.
medications. And then we were hit with another health issue with my father where he ended up having a heart attack.
Oh.
My mom woke me up and she goes, "We need to go to the hospital now." I'm like, "Why don't you just call 911?" And
Uh-huh.
she's like, "No, no, no, it's faster for us to go drive him to the hospital." And the only thing was he kept saying, he was sitting on the side of the bed, was, "It feels full in my chest." And I
Oh.
was like, "What the heck does that mean?"
Oh.
Um, and so I drove my mom and my dad
Uh-huh.
to the hospital, dropped them off to the emergency room. I kind of knocked on my younger brother's door and said, "Hey, I'm going to go to the emergency room. I have to drive the parents. There's
Uh-huh.
something going on with pops."
Right.
And so we got to the emergency room, to the same hospital that my mom works in. So we kind of got fast tracked. And so
Mm-hmm.
um, I was there with my mom for the first 10 minutes, and then
Mm-hmm.
the ED nurse goes, "Excuse us, we have to examine him," because they have to make sure, they had to do a rectal examination on him,
Mm-hmm.
um, to see any signs of bleeding, because I
Uh-huh.
at that time wasn't a nurse, wasn't in nursing school.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that they had to make sure is that, is he qualified to take anti
Uh-huh.
platelets medications.
Mm.
So my mom called her own cardiologist to say, "Hey, my husband's in the emergency room. He's probably having a heart attack." And
Mm-hmm.
so the cardiologist called the nearest place that had PCI, which was Robert
Mm-hmm.
Wood, and within a couple of within an hour, my dad was transferred to the nearest university hospital for PCI, and he ended up having two stents placed
Uh-huh.
in
Oh.
Robert Wood, and that was my first introduction of a major hospital. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
ooh, because you, the hospital that my mom worked in was a community hospital, so
Uh-huh.
it's the top floor, the fifth floor. And
Yeah.
when you go to these university hospitals, it's 10 floors, and then you go to like, which ICU do you go to? I'm like, what do you mean, what
Right.
ICU? Um, so I would have to drive my mom when I went to school in college.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I would have to drive my mom, drop her off at Robert Wood, go to
Uh-huh.
school, pick up my mom, and vice versa. And sometimes I would have to take my brother to basketball practice,
Yeah.
because you had to keep living the life of, you just
Mm-hmm.
can't, you couldn't stop just because something emergency. So you took certain roles of where can you
Yeah.
help and pitch in. So luckily I had my driver's license during that time, so
Yeah.
I was the driver for the most part while going to school. So luckily now my father is maintained on Gleevec, and he was on Plavix for a long time and aspirin.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think he's just on aspirin, because
Uh-huh.
we know that the Plavix doesn't hold much weight after a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that was something new back when, PCI, like,
Yeah.
what is that? um, so it's
Wow.
big, especially in their friends circle, where like a lot of people of my father's age, um, diagnosed with cancer and did not
Mm-hmm.
survive cancer.
Yeah.
Um, I alone lost two family members, my mom's sister, and then my father's sister died of cancer as well. So I have the underlying, probably genetic
Mm-hmm.
predisposition of cancer, but I think that's something also that you know I always have at the back of my mind. Do I have that predisposition? Because my father side, the two siblings have
Mm-hmm.
it. They have cancer. So it's kind of something.
Right. So you were still going to nursing school when all of these things were happening, right?
No, I was actually in school
Uh-huh.
for I was undecided for undecided undergrad at Rutgers University,
Uh-huh.
and unfortunately, I did have when it came time to say, "Hey, you have to do the paperwork to declare a major," I kind of
Uh-huh.
froze. But I was in high I'm grateful for my parents because they didn't force nursing on me.
Uh-huh.
I they did give me the here you go, here's the nursing application, and I put
Uh-huh.
it away.
Yeah.
But when it came down to putting in a major for nursing
Uh-huh.
for my undergrad, I was like I couldn't do it, and I had to drop out of school. And I said, FYI. So it was so funny because I'm like I'm breaking the news that I'm dropping out of school, and in our culture it's like a lot of like you want to succeed
Uh-huh.
in a sense. So I'm like I'm dropping out of um college,
Mm-hmm.
and like 2 years of 2 and a half, a year and a half of college, and then they're like but I said
Uh-huh.
but I'm gonna go for nursing. They're like thank you. Like, they're like, "Thank you." I'm like, okay." I was like, because I felt like, "Oh my god, I'm dropping out of school. I took out student loans, and now I'm going to nursing school." They're like, "No, thank you." They're like, "Thank you for making that decision."
For making
They were
that
grateful
decision.
that I went to nursing.
Yeah.
Um, I thought I was gonna be like the bad child of not finishing college in a sense, but yeah. But when I
Oh.
went to nursing school, it was a different story with nursing school because I went to a diploma program. The diploma program was through my mother's hospital during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you talk to nurses now, they're like, "Oh, I started off as a diploma." And they're like, "What is that?" I said, "You learn you learn nursing, like
Uh-huh.
taking care of patients from day one." So
Yeah.
I went to diploma program through my mom's school work,
Work.
and so all my teachers knew my mom.
Wow.
So there was a lot added pressure to it. They're like,
Uh-huh.
"We know your mother's a telemetry nurse. You better pass the cardiac class." I'm like, "Oh my god!" Like that was. I was like, when I handed in my paper, I'm like, "Hopefully, I got nothing wrong. But if I do, I'm fine." But there was still, pressure in that sense
Yeah.
because they know how your mother works and how your mother is a
Mm-hmm.
nurse.
Right.
Um, but you also have to kind of come into your own
Right.
person as a nurse, and um, that's how also I learned about informatics.
Mm-hmm.
In nursing school, you know, they're like, "Oh, who wants to take you do an elective." Everybody goes,
Yeah.
"I want maternity. I want to do ICU." I was like, and then I see this like little blurb, informatics. I'm like, "What is informatics?"
What is
Um,
informatics?
I'm like, I'm looking at my longevity here, and I'm like, "What is informatics?" So I kind of Googled very quickly what
Uh-huh.
informatics was, and it just says computers, nursing, and that's it, right? And
Uh-huh.
so, um, I was like, okay, during that time, Yahoo Health was big, Google Health was big. We were starting to talk about EMRs
Mm-hmm.
and rollouts and things like that. It's like, oh, let me just go. And so I that was my first precursor to nursing informatics, and um, I think she I didn't know at that time, but I think she is a PNA member,
Mm-hmm.
PNAA member, and also Ati Rose Estrada.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Um, yeah, she worked in the same hospital as my mother. She's actually the recruiter of my mother.
Oh,
Full come
wow.
circle. um, She's like, "No," because my mom goes, "You wanna get out of bedside when you finish nursing. Like, you can't survive this life." So that's why I was like, "Oh, informatics is big." I'm like, "You just, you do all these things outside of taking care of breaking your back." So my introduction was Excel, Excel files. I'm like,
Excel
"What is
files.
Excel?" I'm like, "I don't even do Word documentations." And the first thing that my preceptor during the time goes, I need for you to input 26 nurses in this Excel file, alphabetize it, and then
Mhm.
their codes and whatever. And I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know what I'm doing, but sure, I don't know what. So I like, you kind of figure out how do you do Excel? There was
Uh-huh.
no YouTube back then, so
Right.
you trial and error, and that's
Yeah.
how it became. So I graduated nursing,
Uh-huh.
and I my first job. Um, Luckily, I got a scholarship at the end of my senior year, where you get employed at the hospital that the
Mhm.
nursing school was. My first job, there was a there was kind of a caveat to it. My mom, in order for me to take a position in the floor, my mom had to leave the floor, and I
Oh.
actually took her position. So this is like how uh, the universe. It seems like it works in
Mhm.
my world. My mom had to become a nurse manager for the stroke
Wow.
unit. I took her position for her day. I was like, I don't want to do nights. I want to do days. I
Mhm.
was like, I'm surprised. So I took day shift as a telemetry nurse
Wow.
with her old coworkers. So
Yeah.
they like my mom's like, my daughter's coming. Everybody like my nurse manager knew me since I was 7. So really, the first question goes, so what shift do you really want? I'm like,
Uh-huh.
I want day shift because I want to have a normal sleeping habit.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I went through that whole gamut of working in the same hospital as my parents, my
Uh-huh.
mom and my dad. Um, and so it's so funny because the doctors would be like, so how's your mom? I'm like, oh, she's right there. You can ask her. Or, they jokingly goes, we can just tell your mom like you're not like doing the best. I'm like, well, that's okay. She's right there. You could go across the hallway and tell her what you feel like you want to like vent off about me, but I'm pretty sure you just want to make sure I keep my toes up. And so, you know, that was also my first encounter of um passive aggressive in a
Uh-huh.
sense, in in a sense where somebody said you're Filipinoism. I was like, what? I'm like, what the heck's Filipinoism mean?
Yeah.
Because I we had a nursing student and it was time to give medications, and the nursing student put as a documentation, get medication not given, meds in pharmacy. And I'm like, what is that? Like, why would you document that in the EMR? You should just said something to me as the primary nurse, because I could still give it. You Now I have to document against your documentation. So
Mhm.
I approached um the student. I'm like, oh, can you just please give me the reason why you gave this? Like, oh, my teacher told me to. I'm like, okay. So I approached the teacher, and the teacher knew that my parents worked in the same hospital. He goes, well, I don't know if it's your Filipinoism or the fact that your parents work here. And I said,
Oh.
what does this mean? So I said, if you mean by Filipinoism, my hard work and understanding that I need to do what I need to do to keep my patients safe.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, I was like, no, you can't put my ethnicity, my culture
Mhm.
against me, for safe practice.
Uh-huh.
And luckily, I was advocating enough for myself
Mhm.
to tell my manager, I'm like, this is what just occurred. And she's
Mhm.
like, no, 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 that's inappropriate. And so that was kind of a pivoting moment. I'm like, you
Mhm.
have a voice. You can stand up for yourself no matter where
Yeah.
you are. And especially like with COVID, with xenophobia,
Uh-huh.
the trauma that you've experienced as an
Right.
Asian woman, as an Asian nurse, kind of like bubbled up in the surface. And you're like, I had to defend myself most of my
Mhm.
time in my colleagues, because they think that, you know, which is great and all, like, they know that the nurses in the Philippines work hard, they work diligently,
Right.
but each one of us stand on our own. It's not because we're Filipinos. We are our own beings with our
Mhm.
own purpose. We like you just can't say my Filipinoism.
Yeah.
That was the first part. Yeah.
Well, Ellen, being a parent of nurses who works the same place that you are, I feel the pressure, right? What did you feel during that period of time? You're a new nurse, trying to trying to be a great nurse at the bedside, but this pressure of being a daughter of someone who works there. Other than the pressure of what else were you feeling as a nurse at that time?
Um, Luckily, I had a lot of support from my mom's colleagues. It was very supportive, because they treated me individually. Like they knew my mom, but they
Mhm.
treated me as like you're on your own. You're the
Mm,
nurse that has to
Mhm.
stand on your 2 feet. Um, and so they they knew in a sense that like, hey, backup is mom, but at the end of the day, you still have to stand on the work that you do for your
Yeah.
patients. So
mhm,
there was there's the Filipino training that my mom has that from nursing school, and then there's the American training, which is different, right? So um, it's still at the end of the day, it's the caring of the person in front of you.
Mhm.
How you develop relationships with the family, how do you develop patients relationships with the patient, how do you develop relationships with your colleagues. And so, as much as they were my aunts, my titas, my titos, my lolas, so they're still my colleague at the end of the day. And so you kind of have to put that in a back burner. And then when you get off the clock, it's like, okay, now it's back to that type of relationship. But when I went to work, it was more of, okay, this is my nursing hat. I cannot
Uh-huh.
um, put the pressure of what people think of me
mhm.
onto myself. Let them think of what they think of me, but I need to advocate for
Uh-huh.
who I am, what I do, and for my patients.
I see.
Very nice.
That's
Yeah.
good.
So, a while ago, you mentioned that you and Dr. Rose Estrada had a conversation about nursing informatics. You're involved
hmm
in PNAA Nursing Informatics Significant Interest Group. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
So it's so funny because Dr. Estrada was my mom's recruiter. So when Dr. Garcia Dia, we know that she's uh, nursing. She has the background of nurse informaticist.
Mhm.
She's actually my colleague at work. Um, the biggest thing is everybody wants to become an informaticist in a sense because there's a shift now. There's
Mhm.
technology shift. There's a digital age that
Right.
we're going beyond the electronic medical health records, and people go, oh, so what do I do? And so the significant interest group kind of came up about from me working with I call her MJ, with MJ. Um, I don't call her Dr. Dia. It's kind of weird. MJ, where she's like, well, the interest is there, but how
Mhm.
can we um, get this interest in a Filipino nursing association? So this is
Mhm.
where we came up with the brainchild of let's go under the significant interest group to see if anybody is interested in learning informatics, what's out there, learn from who is working as the role of informaticist. Because um, when you say nurse informaticist, it's such a gray area. We
Mhm.
cover not just only the EMR, electronic medical
Mhm,
health records,
mhm,
but we also look at the vendor side, such as like the
Ah.
Hillroms, the Baxters, the
Mhm.
medications, AstraZeneca. So we're not just doing the whole here. Let's create flow sheets. Let's
Mhm.
It's more of like, hey, can we educate nurses how to use technology? What
Mhm.
workflows or how does the process of point A to point B work in a nursing, and how does technology help it?
Uh-huh.
So people don't understand that this is not just creating documents. It's
Mhm.
looking at data. It's looking at uh, giving medications to safely. It's talking.
Uh-huh.
It's doing cybersecurity. So that's
Right.
something big. And the way Dr. Estrada came about was she was the nursing supervisor during that point. She was, I think, the head. She was the director of nursing informatics at what was not before one of the colleges in New Jersey that went under Rutgers. And she goes, I'm the director of nursing informatics. Maybe you should try it out as a
Uh-huh.
certificate. So that I've always had that back in my mind. She goes, you want to that, and again, it goes back to you want to save your back. Um,
Uh-huh.
you you you, you want to make sure you're healthy in the
Mhm.
long run because we know that bedside nursing is physically, not just
Mhm.
emotionally and spiritually heavy, but it's physically demanding,
Right.
turning patients, lifting patients, bending.
Yeah.
So the ergonomic factor is like, where do
Mhm.
you want to save yourself? And so she's like, oh, just see where it was. And my first role as a nurse informaticist, besides my precept of my elective was teaching. I
Mhm.
actually teach. I actually taught. They're like my manager goes, Ellen, nursing education needs assistance in training nurses on how to barcode scan. I said,
Mhm.
what do I have to do? Because I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, oh, they just need to teach nurses how to scan, and you just have to assist the nursing educator. And I said, oh, okay, sure, why not? And so I just read the PowerPoint slides and said, um, watched it happen and
Mhm.
then jumped in where the nurse was struggling, trying to figure out like, how do I scan? Where do I scan? How do
Mhm.
I know what if I scan the right way? So that
Uh-huh.
was my first introduction
Uh-huh.
as a nurse in
Yeah.
the informatics world. And
Yeah.
then when technology kind of came about, I was sent to like, hey, evaluate this device.
Mhm.
Even just looking at the blood pressure machine and how it's wheeled down up and down the hallway. I was like, no, 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 what kind of wheels are these? This is going to get stuck. And they're like, what are you
Uh-huh.
talking about? I said, it needs to move in 360, not just this one back and forth, because,
Uh-huh.
nurses have to go in multiple directions. And if it's
Right.
heavy, it's not going to move. And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. So that's where
Uh,
like the whole idea is. And that's,
Yeah.
you know, it's the creative aspect of where
mhm.
you can use your expertise in
Yeah.
the clinical setting.
So
Yeah.
I see, Ellen, you, me, and Manny understands what nursing informatics is. But for the purpose of some of our listeners who are not nurses, and there are a lot of them there, tell us about it. What is nursing informatics?
You, the official definition is basically the art of nursing, computer science, and information science
Mhm.
um, in the collaborative in this its intertwined network where the nurse looks at how computer systems work and how information, meaning data, my blood pressure, my heart rate, gets into a system or a program and how it digests it and pushes out to the end users
Mhm.
to see. So that's kind of in a nutshell what informatics is. But for me, nursing informatics is looking at technology and the use of technology in um, in the clinical setting.
Mhm.
Clinical setting means hospitals, homes,
Right.
offices, because now we have hospitals at homes, we have telehealth,
Mhm.
Right.
um, and how data is exchanged. Data meaning health information,
Right.
my health history, my measurements
Mhm.
is being exchanged to make sure that the clinicians and the patient have a relationship to make sure your well-being is a top priority.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I was just a follow up question about it. I was an associate CNO when Epic got started in the hospital that I used to work for. So I understand all this
Oh,
multi generational nurses that some people are very advanced on technology and some are not. So, what challenges other than the multi generational, where some don't even know where to turn on the power with regards to technology? How did you,
yeah.
what were the opportunities that you saw when you were doing these changes at the bedside?
You're right about the generational gap, and that's where we have the adoption model. You always find the very excited person, and you say, hey, you feed them the right things to say, and hopefully people gravitate towards that. But
Mm-hmm.
um, from my experience, I don't gravitate towards the early adopters of technology. I try to gravitate towards the laggards because they're gonna be the ones who bring down the whole thing because they're gonna get frustrated. They're
Uh-huh.
gonna be like, "I give up," and then
Mm-hmm.
not gonna use the technology that they're gonna create work. They're the ones who are gonna create workarounds, and so there's the opportunity. It's like, how do you make training fun
Uh-huh.
for nurses? You can't put nurses in an 8 hour. I can't even put it for my. I can't even do it for myself. Why would you do it to others? Um, you have to make learning fun
Yeah.
and also where they can digest it very easily. So if I have to take time to create a video that's specific for the nurse that's gonna take time and take time to pause and repeat again, then that's one opportunity. The biggest opportunity is that you can go anywhere with it. I've been in hackathons. I've presented ideas and in development. It's not just here's an app. You know, we sometimes have a joke. You can build an app for it. Uh, uh, it's like your app overloaded because
Right,
at the end of the
right.
day, it might not be an app. It might be a device. So
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
like one of the biggest things that I learned in my master's degree, I was part of an kind of I call it kind of a hackathon, I guess, was to address elderly falls.
Mhm.
And so my team and I came up with a design for what we call an urban walker. We looked at the design of a walker at that point, evaluated what devices, what equipments are out there to help with the elderly at night. So we kind of like devised, like, hey, let's make sure that, you know, we see that in the hospitals when the walker comes and the PT comes, they lay on the side of the wall and it's like kind of slanted, and we're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, patients are not going to have that opportunity to rest their walkers
Yeah.
against the wall. It's going to be open,
Yeah.
um, and then also being able to like easily fold it. There's the grips and things. So we were like with PVC piping and glow in the dark paint, we created this like full like this like accordion walker and presented it to Medline. And I was like, oh, this is the first time we had to do a pitch. This is what a pitch looks like.
Uh-huh.
And the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway that I saw when in this thing was we were the only ones that had two nurses in the team.
Mm.
Mhm.
The other schools had no nurses, no one in the
Oh,
medical field working in the
Wow.
group.
wow.
So I'm like, it's all good and fun, but
Yeah.
when you really want to talk about healthcare technology, you need someone that takes care of patients, that's front
Mhm.
facing to patients to give you the overview and the pains that they see and experience. And so that's why I think we're besides the power button, um, you know, when we do help desk, what's the first thing is, did you turn it on?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it gets frustrating. I'm like, I did turn it on. I'm like, I would not call you. I usually, my rule is if I try to do 3 times and it's still not working out, that's when I will contact help desk.
Yeah.
But I think nurses still think that you're the geek squad, where you're like, hey, how do I turn on my phone? How do I update this? You know, this process. I can't log in. I'm like, well, I don't know your password. How do you know your password? When was the last time you turned on your last time you logged in? So that was one of the biggest things. The biggest wins that we can do as nurse informaticists or any part of technology is have our presence, not in just hey, let's just survey the nurses. No, you need to be part of the board. You need to be part of the
Uh-huh.
steering committee in any of the systems, because at the end of the day, you're the one who knows how the impact of technology is. People are rolling out patient portals,
Yeah.
and devices left and right, but the biggest thing is like, well, then how did the nurse teach that patient? I don't know. Then we still have work to do, but I think we're getting there,
Yeah.
where nurses are saying we need this. We will put our our presence known in where we need to be, and
Mhm.
hospitals are seeing that the importance of nurse informaticists in connecting, the bridge between IT, clinical nurses, and the patients.
Yeah. So, Ellen, you have been very, very busy. I see that you're also involved with Kalusugan Coalition. So, tell us a little
Yes.
bit about your work at Kalusugan Coalition.
So I started off, with Kalusugan Coalition about 5 years now.
Uh huh.
As just a let's it's Kalusugan Coalition is a nonprofit organization that's based out of the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. That's the areas that they serve.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Founded 10 years ago,
Yeah.
multidisciplinary. And so the work I was started on was, the Healthy Heart Initiative. We
Mm-hmm.
know that cardiovascular health, diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes are kind of the three main morbidities, mortality in Filipino communities.
Yeah.
So they were in this grant for, Healthy Hearts, and they partnered up with local Filipino restaurants in Queens
Mm-hmm.
and created, low sodium, low salt, low fat,
Uh-huh.
Filipino, dishes. And
Yeah.
so they did research on that and it was actually part of the NIH, grant,
Mm-hmm.
uh, where they also created, culturally linguistic, materials to say,
Uh-huh.
hey, if you want to look at food, look at the food plate in Tagalog. I don't speak Tagalog, but I kind of understand it. So it's my friends make fun of me. I'm like, there's the English accent in the Tagalog or Ilonggo. But it's okay. I understand it. I just smile because people don't think that I don't understand it. um, but that was the first initiative that I worked on as a board member, and then I became a treasurer, for Kalasugan for now 4 years, and so we I represented them during health fairs, during, blood pressure screening, and then the biggest one that I was involved in was, the All of Us the
Mm-hmm.
All of Us project, or the program. I didn't know about it,
Uh-huh.
until, um, they're like, meet me at Harlem Hospital. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's a fair at the Harlem Hospital. It's about All of Us program. I said, oh, okay. You just show up when you're told to go to.
Yeah.
And I happened to live in New York at that time. And so I said, okay, fine. Let me just show up to Harlem. It's only a, a hill down and it's right there. So they're like, I showed up, and then there's tents, and then there's music, and I'm like, well, so you kind of like learn about more about it. And the first, it was the launch of All of Us in New York City,
Mm.
and there like we had a tent taking blood pressure screening, giving out educational guides on how to healthy heart initiative, because that it's one of those things that you just make sure you educate the community of what initiative you're working on, and also making sure that, hey, you want to get your blood pressure checked here, and make sure you follow up with the doctors. So lo and behold, you take your pictures like one in a million, and you learn more about it. And Dr. Francis Collin was actually in person during the launch. Um, but the backstory about getting involved for that day during the launch was in Harlem is because of the fact of the trust, the trust in research, the trust in
Mhm.
science,
Mhm.
because we all know it's well documented about the Tuskegee
Right.
study, as
Right,
well as the
right.
Henrietta Lacks cells. So that's why they chose Harlem, is to get the African American Black communities involved, and they did it in Abinson Church, which is one of the oldest churches in Harlem.
Mhm.
And the pastor, like, that's how they, like, just to see how the community relationship is very key in
Uh-huh.
how you get this participation. It's all good to have the fanfare,
Yeah,
but you have to break down the barriers
Mhm.
that was created from the mistrust
I see.
in science.
I see.
So it was just kind of like, the MJ's like, "You know who he is?" I'm like, "Yes, a very tall white man." um, Dr. Collins is a very tall white man, and like, over 5 feet, and then here's a 6 foot man. And I'm like, "So why did you come up?" So the first, I said, I'm like very interested. Like, it's good that you're doing this initiative, but
Uh-huh.
why did you? So the one question I asked him is, what made you think to do this initiative?
Mhm.
Um, because I think 1 million is asking a lot. And so he's like, well, um, it's been kind of an ongoing goal of mine, is to have this data rich program
Mhm.
where the patient's de-identified, and we just want to know what we have that we can research on to make sure we live longer, we live a healthier life. I said,
Yeah.
oh, like, then that kind of like understood, like, okay,
Yeah.
I understand from a healthcare perspective, and I also understand from a daughter whose parents
Mhm.
have high blood pressure,
Mhm.
high, primary blood, your siblings, your one of your siblings is a primary hypertensive, and
Right.
then one's a borderline, even though you live an active, healthy life,
Right.
your genetics
Yeah.
keeps you predisposed. So I was like,
Right.
oh, that's very interesting. And I'm like, so we were the only Filipino organization
Uh-huh.
um, during the launch, despite the fact that there was no Filipinos, or like very lack of during that time. um, the work started to come around during that summer. And so I was heavily involved in promoting,
Mhm.
just to say, hey, there's this program that's led by
Yeah.
NIH. And so one of the second work was recruiting different Asian communities to come
Mhm.
to NYU to have breakfast, and also organize this breakfast education series by
Mhm.
the NIH. Somebody came in to just talk about what it means, what all of us means, why is it
Yeah.
important, and answer all those questions. And the biggest questions that they usually have is, my insurance.
Uh-huh.
What are the implications if I'm not insured?
Yeah.
What are the implications if something was found out about me? That will I lose insurance? What about my name? Will it be kept secret? And
Mm-hmm.
so these were the common themes. And so when people ask you these questions, like, how would I like know? So that's I'm like, you know what? Let me just sign up because I'm like, why? Like, first of all, I am promoting,
So you signed
and
up. You
I
signed up with
signed
the All
up.
of Us. Oh,
Well, I
okay.
signed up for All of Us. I was like, I'm promoting. I'm sitting there being an advocate and like telling them like, hey, this is what we're doing as an organization. And then I'm
Uh-huh.
like, yeah, I'm not signed up. So, so I said, let me just see. I'm like, and let me see what really
The
as
program is
an
about.
experienced program is
Uh-huh.
about.
So what's the
You do
difference
go.
between, I'm sorry, what's the difference
Mhm.
between Kalusugan and All of Us program?
So All of Us program is through the National Institutes of Health. So this is a national incentive, and we had a grant where Kalusugan Coalition, um, because of the work that we do in the community and the partnership that we have with faith-based organizations from previous studies
Mm-hmm.
and research, we were able to kind of generate that relationship and say,
Mm-hmm.
if there was a representative from the NIH that was um, that wanted to speak about the All of Us program, we can say to our one of our faith-based organizations, "Hey, we have an NIH representative. They just want to talk to you about 30
Mm-hmm.
minutes about the All of Us program, what it means, what it does, and how you can get involved." So we were just a partnership to link
Mm-hmm.
that program to the community. So that was big because
Yeah.
people didn't know how to reach the Asian communities. You
Mm-hmm.
saw in the
Yeah.
beginning of the program, you had a lot of white population, a little bit of the black population, a little bit of the Hispanics.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest things that we saw was, well, your advertising wasn't directed to Asians. You
Mm-hmm.
have,
Mm,
if you want to talk Asian communities, you have to gear gear the pictures,
Mm-hmm.
the videos towards them. And so
Yeah.
that was one of the biggest things. A lot of feedback was, well, it's only in English and Spanish. What about our languages?
Uh-huh.
And so whatever feedback we had from Kalasugan based on the programs that we were hosting uh, on behalf of the grant, we had a little consortium in New York, and we gave them a feedback and say, hey, um, our population wants a non-English
Uh-huh.
pamphlet, a non-English brochure. And the whole conversation was, it takes time to get approval for the medical languages to be approved, and because it's the National Institutes of Health, we could bring it back. So whatever we
Uh-huh.
said in that consortium was brought back to the bigger
Mm-hmm.
program.
did it work?
Um, they did have now Asian Asian people on the pictures, but I feel like it's still like still not enough. It didn't hit home for me. Like when
Uh-huh.
I looked at it, I'm like,
Mm,
no, like I don't like it didn't hit in a sense where Filipinos are very family oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, well, I understand this Asian man with a chef, like the apron and like smiling and with food. And then there was one with like an Asian lady in like a power suit. And I'm like, that's all great and fun, but I think you kind of missed the mark in that sense where this is a family. What is it in for me? Like, you only show one person at a time. It doesn't hit home in that sense for me.
mhm.
And
So when Asians and other minorities would ask you when you're all campaigning for this All of Us program and ask you why is it important to participate in this All of Us program, how would you answer that question?
so so I had like two things. The first one goes,
Uh-huh.
"Oh, do you know about precision medicine?" They're like, "What is precision medicine?" I said, "I see you're wearing glasses there." And
Uh-huh.
so, that was one of the elevator speeches. Like, "I see your glasses there. That's precision medicine because not everybody has the same grade as you."
Uh-huh.
And then,
Oh.
for the younger generation, they're like, "So what's in it for me?" I said, "Do you take care of your mom? Do you take care of your father? Do you take care of your grandfather? Do you take care of your grandmother?" And then they're like, "Yes." I said, "So do they have high blood pressure? And then do they have diabetes? Do they have
Mhm.
cholesterol?" I said, they're like, "Yeah." I said, "Okay. Now imagine you taking care of them in 5 years
Uh-huh.
where where research and the medicine that they're taking is not prescribed to them in a sense that it's genetically helping them,
Uh-huh.
because it's tested on non-Filipino, non-Asian communities." And they're like,
Uh-huh.
"Oh." I said, "Because Filipinos," I said, "my family has predisposed high blood pressure. You might also have it. So how do you help our future? Because you and I will be in that boat later on. So now is the time for us to understand how can we stay healthy and be more proactive in our health." And so that's kind of the things that I kind of talk to them about. And I said I also kind of did it for my sons because I suffer from migraines. I want to make sure. And then afterwards, in hindsight, people do 23andMe, the
Mhm.
ancestry.com.
Mhm.
You're basically giving your DNA for $100. You're paying $100 to give your DNA to a data repository. So I'm like, you're paying someone instead of you getting something back in return for free, which is the time and effort of filling out some forms. Yes, it is lengthy to go through the education of, hey, this is the All of Us research, but I do appreciate that one, they had the video of what is the All of Us research when you are go want to enroll, because you could stop. It has closed caption for those who can't, you know, listen. You can't hear very well or just want to read the closed caption, and it tells you what your rights are as a person. You can opt out at at any time. And so I did have a lot of hesitations as an enrollee in the beginning.
Uh-huh.
Um, I submitted my blood samples, and then when it comes to goes, then there was the whole thing of, do you want to give access to your EMR record?
Yeah.
And thinking to myself, now they really need to know all about me. Uh, I'm like, not just my DNA, but really all about me. And I opted out. I really opted out. And I'm like, oh, wait, hold on. Let me just think this through.
Uh-huh.
So I opted out and then opted back in to release my
Uh-huh.
medical records to the hospital that they deemed to hold the medical records, but it's de-identified because, you know health history taking
Mhm.
in our sense is like very, very bad in the Filipinos, because I feel like, one, in the Philippines there's really not a good bookkeeping. You
Mhm.
hear people goes, "Oh, my birthday is really not the right birthday that I have," or you don't even have, like, you don't even have the right ancestry line. um so I said, okay, fine, let me just opt back in. And now,
Uh-huh.
you get emails about, it did take some time from when I enrolled to what I do now. Like, I get emails that say, hey, there's an update. You want to see your results?
Uh-huh.
And so you get that reward that, the commercial ancestry DNA testing does,
Uh-huh.
and but you're giving it back to research. But what I also noticed now is that I actually did 23andMe just to see what my ancestry line was, because the All of Us was a little like behind, but my brother got his. Was that a Filipino? So then I'm like, "Oh, 100% Filipino." I'm like, "Oh, very disappointed." I'm like, I just like I'm like, "I don't wanna be told I'm 100% Filipino, maybe, like, just there's an inkling of something else in there." But, you know, last year, I think we were doing one of the presentations for All of Us.
Mhm,
I think one of the agents came to talk, and I said, "Oh, yeah, I think, um" I said to my brother, "Well," I just texted him, "Why don't you just do this All of Us program, see where you are." And so he signed up. I was like, I'm like, I'm surprised you actually signed up for it. Um, but I got my brother to sign up.
Mm,
Unfortunately, the barriers is that still the barrier is that the location of the sites. It's
mhm.
I
not
see.
it's not everywhere.
Oh.
Um, no, it's not. The reason why it was easier in New York is because there was 4 no, there's hubs. They have
Mhm,
different site hubs that could
Mhm.
collect the samples. So if you lived in New York, it's easier to you, but if you live in New Jersey, Connecticut, you would have to go to New York to go
Mm.
to the nearest, hospital that has the All of Us program and meet with the navigator. So that was one of the things that I think still is a big issue in recruitment is
mhm.
that accessibility to an All of Us program hub for to give your DNA, your samples, and making sure that you're connected to a navigator.
Those were great stories that you just mentioned, Ellen. But what are your hopes for All of Us program?
Um, my hopes is to have more uh, Filipino representations in the data. Um, we're still not up to par where we want to be.
Mhm,
It's very important that we are counted. Our DNA is different. Our environmental upbringing is different. As you knew
mhm.
in the beginning, I was born in the Philippines, grew up here, but different environments, different latitude, longitude would shape the way we are
Mhm.
made. And so the other thing that I hope for is that the impact of what the researchers are doing is shared.
Mm.
Um, we shared our parts of ourselves in an anonymous way, but I'm getting it back in a sense of certain predispositions out there. But I think it needs to be um, shared bigger in what
Yeah.
impacts we have in the data that we've collected.
Wow, Ellen. Well, I'd love to have more of your stories, and we certainly
That's right.
enjoyed it in this short time that we had. But that is all that we have for this episode, and I want to thank you, Ellen Arigogat, our guest tonight, and of course my co-host Mindy Ofiana, our director and producer Rodney Cahudo, Carol Robles, PNAA Chair for Communications and Marketing, our advisor, PNAA Foundation President Nancy Hoff, and our executive producers, PNAA President Dr. Mary Joy Garcia Dia and PNAA Executive Director Carmina Bautista. Join us every Wednesday here on Rise Up, and up till then, keep on rising. See you next week. This program is made possible through the NIH All of Us Research Program. PNAAF is a national collaborator of the Asian Engagement and Recruitment Corps launched by the Asian Health Coalition, which is a national community engagement partner for the NIH All of Us Research Program.